Hello. On behalf of All One Body and the Hesed Project CRC, welcome to this conversation with the Reverend Clayton Libolt. This past June, Synod 2022 made some decisions concerning human sexuality that heightened conflict within the CRC. And many now are asking questions like, how loyal am I to the CRC? What good are denominations anyway? Today, Reverend Thea Link and myself, Don Heisinger, will engage Clay Libolt, a respected pastor, biblical scholar, and creator of the blog, The Peripatetic Pastor. We will engage him in conversation about such questions as, what makes for a healthy denomination? What are we in danger of losing? Before we start that conversation, I would like to begin with prayer. Lord Jesus, thank you for loving us, especially for adopting us as your children. As you know, we in the CRC family are experiencing deep conflict with one another concerning matters of sexuality. But there is no conflict about this. We desire to love our neighbor as you have loved us, those inside our church family and those outside, no matter what their sexual identity. So we ask you to bend this conversation toward that end. For the sake of Jesus, amen.
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 So we'll start with asking Clay Libolt to introduce himself and Thea Link to introduce herself. I will introduce myself briefly, and then we'll start the conversation.
So I'm Clay Libolt, and I have been a part of the Christian Reformed Church for my whole life. And I think that that's probably relevant here. There was a time when the Christian Reformed Church was not particularly happy with me. And during that time, it was often suggested to me that maybe I wanted to move into another denomination. And I said, I don't think so. I'm kind of loyal to this group of people, and they have been pretty loyal to me in return. And so there's something deep and wonderful about being part of a body which has existed so long and in so many different places. So that's who I am, Clay Libolt, Christian Reformed.
And I'm Thea Link, and like Clay, I too am a lifelong member of the Christian Reformed Church. And similar to Clay, I had a point in my life where I had to decide if I wanted to stay or not, and that was around the woman in office issue. Would I even be welcome as a woman minister in the CRC? Should I stick it out and hopefully have that come true for me at some point? Or shouldn't I just simply bail and go to a different denomination where that would have been much easier to have made happen? But I chose to stay, and I'm very glad I did. My years as a pastor in the CRC were wonderful, chance to do wonderful ministries and meet wonderful people and walk alongside so many people. So I love the Christian Reformed Church, and I want to see it thrive. And I want it to thrive for my children and my grandchildren as well. So that's part of why I'm here at this table today.
And my name is Don Heisinger, and I too have been born and raised in the CRC. I professed my faith in high school, and I have been loyal to the denomination ever since then. And I've often said that being CRC is in my genes. The church I presently attend, I have been a member of for over 50 years. And so it feels very much and acts very much like my family. And so the current conflict concerns me very much. I happen to be a member of All One Body, and my calling was to teach the Bible, and I did so in local Christian schools. I taught the Old Testament and Reformed theology for 39 years. So Thea, will you start us off?
Sure. I'm happy to ask Clay the first question of the day. And that's, as we talk about what makes for a healthy denomination in one of your blogs, you suggested that it's thinking of a denomination as in being engaged in a lengthy conversation about who Jesus is and what it means to follow him. So could you unpack that a little bit more for us? Offer some more words about that?
Yeah, I gotta stop using that word conversation quite so much. But yes, I think of denominations as a long conversation about who Jesus is, and we can lose either part of that, right? We can lose the fact that it's a conversation, or we can lose what the conversation is really about, or what it's trying to help. I did a first sermon here in Beaverton, Oregon, last week, and I was working on that passage in Isaiah 43, in which God says, "Forget about the former things. I'm doing a new thing. Don't you see it?" And so I talked about, now what does it mean for us to be the church in this time? And one of the things that I suggested was that we have to grasp the gospel anew. We have to grasp the gospel anew. And I think that's the work of the church. That's the work of every Sunday. That's what I think we do when we gather together, is we try to grasp the gospel anew. And the gospel is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Too much of Christianity in our time is the claim that people believe that they believe whatever they think they believe, but it seems so distant from Jesus, so distant from the kind of person Jesus was, the kind of message that he preached, the kind of hope that he gave. And so always we have to keep in our central focus that we are the disciples of Jesus Christ. And what does that mean? So as a denomination, we bring our insights, we bring our tradition, we bring all of that. But in the end, we're always looking, what does it mean to be the followers of Jesus in 2022? And if we lose the focus on Jesus, then we've lost the gospel.
In that regard, do you think we have been making in the recent past some mistakes?
Yeah, I'm afraid we have in some ways. The political situation in the United States is very polarized, and some of that kind of polarization, that spirit of polarization, has also come into the church, so that people tend to take more absolute positions. And I might be a little nostalgic about this, but there was a time, I think, when we were able better to speak to each other, even better to debate. Thea has been an officer. She's been the vice president twice, I think, of Synod. And so she knows what it's like to try to herd those cats out there that are debating. But it seems like there was a time when those debates had a kind of flow to them that no longer is the case. Now, some of that, there are a lot of bad things back there, so I'm not trying to bring us back into the past. But is there a sense in which we've lost the flow of the conversation, in which people are saying, you either do it my way or it's the highway, and Synod 2022 seemed to have in it at least some people who had that kind of spirit, that it was very much a spirit of judgment. We need to come down hard in this. And if somebody wants to leave because of what we said, then it's fine. They should just leave. That's not the denomination that I remember.
In one of your blog entries, writing about denominationalism, you used an analogy that was particularly powerful for me, something I could hang on to, and that is the image of the church universal being a cathedral and denominations, chapels within that cathedral. Could you delve into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I have this idea of it was an epiphany for me, actually, at one time, that I was trying to figure out what it meant, what I believed, and so forth. All those kinds of questions that you have, and then suddenly I realized that it wasn't about me, that the church had a shape. And that shape is described in the Nicene Creed or in the Apostles' Creed. It's a shape of a theology, and at the center of that theology is what Thea mentioned earlier, which is Jesus. So the story of Jesus, his teachings, what the cross means, what the resurrection means, all of those things. That's at the core of what it means to be church. And I decided to call that the cathedral. Okay, and so the epiphany was that you can live in the house of your own ideas, which in the case of Clay Libolt would be a little doghouse, right? Because my ideas aren't very much, so that's and I could live there and I'd be very comfortable because all my ideas would agree with me. And a lot of people in the modern church and a lot of people in just modern society, that's what they want to do. They want to live in the house of their own ideas. But over here is this cathedral, this enormous structure, 2,000 years old, in which there are ideas that are far beyond me, things I do not understand, things I don't even like sometimes. And I can walk into the cathedral, like walking into Notre Dame or Westminster or something, and look around and see all of this beautiful things, and I can try to understand what it is that represents. I can choose to live in the house of my own ideas or in the great cathedral. But there's also, like any good cathedral, there are these little chapels around the back. And if you've ever been in a cathedral, you walk around and there's this cathedral, this little chapel dedicated to this person and that saint or whatever. And I think of those as being the denominations. So there's this little Christian Reformed chapel over here, or maybe a Reformed chapel. Maybe it's a little bigger than Christian Reformed, just Reformed. And there's a chapel over here, which is say a Baptist one and the Catholic one and so forth. And the problem comes when the people in the chapel think they're actually in the cathedral. They don't walk back out into the sanctuary and say, "Oh, it's a lot bigger than we thought." And there are old jokes about that. People going to heaven and having to be quiet because they're going by the Christian Reformed section in heaven, and the Christian Reformed people think they're the only ones there. That's the idea. So it's okay to have the chapel. It's okay to have, to do your own thing in that chapel, but don't think it's the cathedral. It's not. The cathedral is much bigger.
I love that analogy, Clay. And like I said, it's something I think a lot of us can cling on to and just keep in mind as we go through our present conflict. So I'm going to go back to the word conversation.
Okay.
Conversations need to take place, in a safe space. We need to make a safe space for each other. You were at the present synod, the past synod in June, as a reporter for the Banner. And so I'd like to give you some safe space right now to talk about, how that impacted you.
Yeah, I was sad about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was sad about it for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons is that they closed the doors on the conversation. The officers made the decision, which apparently they can make, but they made the decision that during the discussion of human sexuality, they would only allow people who delegates and other people that are associated with the Synod, including Banner reporters. So I was in there, but my wife walked up to the doors. She has a great picture of herself reflected in the window, and it says closed, and the session was closed. And then, after the crucial debate, I walked outside, and when I walked outside, there were a whole bunch of people out there protesting, and they were singing the songs of Jesus. They were singing, "They'll know we are Christians by our love," as I recall when I walked out. And it was like 90 degrees out and humid in Michigan, and there they stood. And you were out there, Don, and other people that I knew. And it saddened me that here were loyal Christian Reformed people who were no threat to anybody. We're basically law abiders. And they had to be out there on the parking lot on this hot tarmac instead of sitting in the hall and listening to the debate, and maybe once in a while saying something from the gallery. But who cares? I mean, that's part of who we are. Mm-hmm. It seemed like at that synod there was a division opening up. And then there was this situation with Neyland Avenue Church. Neyland Avenue Church in Classis, Grand Rapids East. It's a historic congregation. I worshiped there often when I was in college. And they have a same-sex, a person in a same-sex marriage who's a deacon. And the synod kind of came down hard on that. And then at the end of that whole thing, one of the delegates, who was in fact the president or the chair of the Neyland Council, stood up to make kind of a little speech. And he was trying very hard, I think, to bridge some of the gap, saying we're loyal, we're Christian Reformed, we're not leaving. But this is going to be really hard for us. We figure out how to do this. And there was such rancor in the hall among some people. It was deeply distressing, I think.
All right, I don't want to dwell on what made you sad too much, but I want to give you a little bit more safe space to talk about when a synod decided that their particular interpretation of Heidelberg Catechism question and answer 108 about unchastity, that their interpretation would have the same authority as the Heidelberg Catechism itself. Could you comment on that a little, please?
Sure. So the synod decided there's in question and answer 108 of the Heidelberg Catechism, there's a reference to unchastity, to things that are not chaste. And it's just a general reference. And they went back to a commentary on that little section of the Catechism written by Ursinus, who was one of the principal author of the Catechism, who said that did apply to same-sex relationships. And then they said, well, no, that makes it confessional. That means that interpretation of it is, in fact, something which is binding on all office bearers. In doing so, they grabbed onto a decision made by Synod 1975. But they completely misread the 1975 decision. They were working in haste, I'm sure. And, I mean, synods are pressure cookers, and, somebody must have suggested that, and they grabbed onto some language out of that. But I'm sure they didn't even actually read it, because what the Synod 1975 said is a synodical decision is never a confessional statement. The confessions are always rule over the synod. That's the relationship. And the Bible over the confession. So that's the hierarchy that was set up in 1975. So they adopted this thing and said it's confessional, which is kind of like putting a big hammer over people, especially people who are not like Thea and me, who are retired, but people who are actually in the pulpit, and saying to them, if you don't comply with this, if you don't stop talking about anything other than the fact that same-sex marriage is wrong, then you could be brought up on charges. That's just wrong. You can file a gravamen, which is the statement that you disagree. But even that is to allow for it to be confessional. You only write gravamens against something that's confessional. I don't think it's confessional. The Synod simply made a mistake, and they ought to walk that back. They ought to look at that again. Just from a technical point of view, that decision was not well formed.
I'm going to switch the thrust of our conversation at this point away from Synod and go back to the idea of our chapel in the cathedral of the Big C Church. What do you think is beautiful about our chapel? What are our gifts that we bring to the greater Catholic faith and confessions of the church?
Yeah. What are we losing here, maybe?
Yeah.
So there is a rich thread of Reformed thought, but in particular of Christian Reform people, which is deeply philosophical, and there's a sense in which we're a very conservative denomination, but a very thoughtful denomination. And part of being thoughtful is allowing discussion, allowing difference, and discussing it out. And the way that you decide it is not by Synod saying, okay, that's the end of the discussion, boom, done. It's by the discussion ongoing until it morphs into something new. It's a conversation, and that conversation changes over time, and it deepens, and it goes off sometimes. Sometimes it actually goes off on rabbit trails, but it comes back. That's part of who we are. We're people who talk and discuss and with each other. So that's really important. And so what do we bring? We bring a deep sense of the sovereignty of God. I mean, I think other denominations also do that, but there is a sense in which the priority of God is the singular Reformed thought. If you wanted to say, what does it mean to be Reformed? It's that God is prior, and that all our decisions, all our ways of talking about God, all of our theologies, all of those things are secondary. God is prior. God is always first, and that's a great legacy. And it ramifies in all kinds of different ways. It underlies our sense of baptism. It underlies our sense of chosenness. All of those things that all comes out of that thought of the priority of God.
Thank you. I want to refer to another one of your blogs, and that was where you talk about Isaiah 11 and the dream of God's people as it was voiced there, where the prophet talks about the wolf lying down with the lamb. And then you reinterpreted or restated it, however you want to, whatever word you want to use there, made it more contemporary by saying, asking, could this be also our vision of God's people, the Christian Reformed Church, that Minn Kota will lie down with Grand Rapids East, and the children of Neeland Avenue will lead them? First of all, I'm wondering if you've received any reactions to that statement, either good or positive or negative, or just that. But then really, do you really, is that a true hope? Is that a true hope that all of us can fasten onto, that something like that is in the future of our denomination?
I don't actually know the answer to that, Thea, but it's so I'll go back to the question that you just asked, which is that what was the response to that? Well, the response to it was mostly gratifying. A lot of people read that particular blog, and a lot of people wrote me or in some way responded and saying, yes, that's our vision too. And even in the people that have opposed me on my blog, I have sensed from time to time a kind of openness to be part of the discussion. And it occurs to me that that maybe the Synod said things more sharply than they meant them. And unfortunately, it's the letter rather than the spirit which gets conveyed, in acts of Synod and so forth. But I wonder if we couldn't just kind of back up a little bit and keep on talking and try to talk respectfully to each other. I had a conversation with, I won't name him because I haven't asked him permission to do that, but I had a conversation with a Minn Kota delegate while I was at Synod, who said to me, this was about, so one of the things that Minn Kota has done for years and years is say that when they go to Synod, they are there under protest because they don't believe that women should be in office, and therefore women should not be part of Synod. And that was particular with this year. It got read, and one woman was just stunned by it. She was not expecting that, and so I had a conversation with her, and then I had a conversation with a delegate from Minn Kota, and he said, "Yeah, maybe we've done that too long, and maybe we need to move on from that a bit." And I just felt like there was a little openness there to saying, yeah, we're all part of the same church, and it's not that Minn Kota is going to agree with Grand Rapids East, but maybe we can live in the same house, the same chapel. So if we're going to use the chapel analogy, we can at least live in that same chapel, and we can shake our, we can speak to each other and say, you're wrong about this, whatever. I remember once going to a Synod, little story. I remember once going to a Synod, and I don't remember what it was I spoke about on the floor of Synod, but I made a speech on the floor of Synod, which I was inclined to do. And I got into the dorm where we were staying, stay in these dormitories. And there was another delegate up like a couple of stories in this open staircase. And he was yelling at me up there, and I was yelling back at him. And I think we had lunch together afterwards. We were part. We disagreed profoundly, but we were still part of the same church. I think that's not an impossible hope. And if it's not difficult, then it's not really hope, right? So let's lean into that. I mean, maybe someday the church will prove us wrong, and we will have to make a decision, be either in or out. But let's lean into it. There's too much to be lost by not leaning into that conversation and saying, yeah, we have something here. Let's not throw it away. And the Christian Reformed Church, frankly, without Grand Rapids East, is not the Christian Reformed Church in the same way. It probably wouldn't be without Minn Kota either, but I have a little harder time seeing that. I'm now temporarily, but I'm in Classes Columbia. That's a very conservative classes. So.
Thank you, Clay, for giving us that hope. I want to cling to that with all my being, so to speak. So thank you for that. So I'm going to give you a chance now, Clay, for any final comments. This is your last chance.
Okay, well, so one of the things that I talked about in a blog, which I think is I discover things by writing sometimes, and this was one of those cases where in a blog I was talking about the confession we make in the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed has that the church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. So I did a little something on one and holy, but not very much. But the apostolic is the way that that's the reference to tradition. Tradition, authentic Christian tradition, is always in some sense apostolic. And there are two forms of tradition. One is the written tradition, the Bible, and the Bible is the apostolic. The New Testament is the apostolic testimony. But there's also a testimony which comes to us through living people. And I think that in some ways, the mistake that maybe the Catholic Church made is to identify that too much with people who are in office, the Pope and so forth. It's a living tradition. We stand on the shoulders of our mothers and fathers, and that's how we learn the faith. That's also a line back that stretches back to the apostles. But my focus in that piece was on Catholic. The word Catholic means what we all share together. That's really what it means, what we share. According to the whole, that's really what it means. So what is it that is according to the whole? That's the cathedral, right? In my analogy. It struck me suddenly that the confessions of the Christian Reformed Church, the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgian Confession, a little less maybe the Canons of Dort, but the confessions are not attempts to say, this is what it means to be Reformed. They are attempts to say, this is what it means to hold the Catholic faith. This is what we should all believe. And if you don't believe that, I mean, if you think that this is just true for Christian Reformed people, but it's not true for, say, Methodists, then, what are we doing here? So to be Catholic is something that denomination should always lean into. We should try to make the Christian Reformed Church, as much as possible, a church which embraces the Catholic truth, the truth that the church has always held and holds everywhere and holds together. So that anybody can walk in to a Christian Reformed Church and they realize here is the great faith, the Catholic faith, the expansive faith of which we are a part, that faith which goes back to the apostles. I think the Christian Reformed Church in that might have lost its way some, so that instead of leaning into the Catholic faith, it leans into what makes us different. And then if you lean into what makes you different, then you're always trying to figure out who's in and who's out. We should be leaning into what we know that could help all of us together across the world to embrace this great faith which has been given to us by Jesus Christ through the power of the Spirit.
Thank you, Clay, for that. Thea, you have any final thoughts?
Nothing at this time. Thank you, Don, for offering me the opportunity, though. But thank you, Clay, for your ideas and your wisdom. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Thea.
And thank you all for joining in. And if you would like to tune into more of Clay's wisdom, make sure you check out his blog, The Peripatetic Pastor. Also, we invite you to keep on checking in on All One Body, because we want to serve you as all of us together are experiencing maybe some new thoughts and feelings about the Christian Reformed Church and about some decisions that the past synod has made.